You're listening to the Career Diaries with Brianna or Sherry, where each week we laugh and learn with industry experts, talk through the highs and lows of their career journeys, and unlock the secrets to career success in any field. Email bri@careerdiariespodcast.com. That's BRI@careerdiariespodcast.com with your burning career questions to get them answered on the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Career Diaries podcast. I am your host, Brianna Autry, and today I'm joined by the awesome Hee Kim. She is the Executive Director at EnCorps. How's it going, Amy?
Good. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. Yeah. We were just talking about how it's cold season, and I just came out of a big one. I'm feeling like I've got a new lease on life.
Nice.
But yeah, I'm excited to chat with you because you're my first nonprofit person that I've interviewed on the podcast. I think nonprofits get sort of an interesting rap. It's either, on one end of the spectrum, they're doing all the good in the world and they're amazing. And then on the other end, it's, well, I don't know if I'd work for one because I make enough income.
Yeah.
We live in America, we live in a capitalist society, whether for good or bad. And when you put not in front of the word profit, I think it can throw some folks off. So I'm excited to talk about a fulfilling career in the nonprofit space and sort of what that means to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just as like a starting off point, can you talk a little bit about what you do now?
Yeah. So I'm just going to introduce myself again. My name is Hee Kim. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called EnCorps. I'm actually trained as a scientist, and I've been in the science education nonprofit sector for now almost 15 years. So what we do at our organization, and I just want to take one step back. And executive director, typically, when you compare to the for-profit sectors, I consider like a CEO. I know like the executive director is like an interesting title. I've been asked many times, like, what does that mean? But anyhow, so I lead a nonprofit, and what we do is what we want to do is encourage more STEM professionals. So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math professionals from these fields to engage in the education system. So an easy way we do that is first by giving them an opportunity to be a virtual math volunteer for tutor for students in inner city schools in LA. But the other part that we do, which I think may be more relevant to your audience, is we help STEM professionals who may want to become teachers, give them an opportunity to teach in the schools and also help them transition their careers if they're interested in becoming a teacher. And then one of the main reasons we do it is because lots of studies show that the students' academics are improved greatly if they're more diverse teachers with similar lived experience as them. So we really have a strong focus on more underrepresented group scientists and engineers becoming teachers and people who come from different geographic locations as well. So I lead the organization that does that work.
And what does your role look like?
Yeah. So as an executive director, I like to tell people my job is to be a professional beggar. I think you started off with this interesting note about there's a miscommunication about nonprofit, non-for-profit, social impact. All of these are really big terms. But at the end of the day, I still need money to execute what we are trying to do. So our end goal is a little different than a commercial organization, where my job isn't to make the most quarterly earning. My job is to impact the most number of students and ideally some sort of quantifiable metric. So for example, for me, it is academic gain is like a big part of my end goal for the students. But in order to do that, I still need to have money. So I do a lot of grant writing. I do a lot of fundraising. I do a lot of pitches. So really and then also about 25% of my time I spend managing the team, and also another 25% kind of creating the vision and the strategy for the organization with financial sustainability in mind. So that in that regard is pretty similar to a for-profit organization.
That's really cool that you're measured on sort of how many students you help as like a metric for success and when you get funding. I wish more companies were like that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think people have have this idea of nonprofit. It's like, oh, it's like feel good. It must look nice to like just help people. But it's still at the end of the day, like I need to present to a funder, like your X amount of dollar was able to result in X number of hours of tutoring and like this much academic gain. So in that regard, and I think there's more push for, as nonprofit funding becomes harder to receive sometimes, I do feel like there's more push for quantifiable, which I think is good, because at the end of the day, people shouldn't just be donating money and giving people money to feel good. At the end of the day, you want results, which is how you become a valid business. So
100%, really well said. And I want to talk a little bit about your background, sort of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah.
So let's go all the way back to like, if you went to college, where'd you go? What'd you study?
Yeah. So I'm going to actually take one more step back. So I actually grew up in Korea, and I used to, believe it or not, be a language major. And I moved to America when I was a junior in high school. My dad was a visiting professor, and he was like, he thought American education system is better. So we moved here. And I really fell in love with math and science in high school here. Like it was the one area I felt like without being able to speak English very well, that I could still succeed. So it was like, because it was, formulas are the same. So like it somehow gave me the confidence. So, and that was outside of DC. And then in college, I went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I studied chemistry there. And I was one of those undergrads. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I want to go to medical school. But my junior year, I started doing research in a research lab at the university. And it was just very interesting because one thing that was really interesting was 99% of my experiments won't work, but the one will work. And that kind of joy you felt from that one working was very exhilarating. So after undergrad, I started graduate school at University of Chicago in the physical chemistry department. And, PhD in chemistry is usually 5 to 7 years. I was there. I graduated in 6 years. I was one of the very few women in my class. There were 2 that started with me, and both of them had left by the time we were in 3rd year. And I don't know, there's something in being in an environment. I think a lot of women in tech probably experience similar things where they feel kind of out of place. Like, is this my place? But one thing that was sort of the core to what I've always wanted to do is solve a real world problem. And that's kind of why I chose science. I always felt like science is solving a problem. And even when I was picking a project to do my research on, I purposely found a project in diabetes because I felt like that diabetes is a real problem, and like, how do I help solve that? And I did a lot of that work. And, I left graduate school really kind of feeling like I want to solve a real problem, but maybe research is not the place to do that because it's so long, right? Like I had a funny story, which is somebody was talking about Ozempic, and I was like, well, I'm going to look up what is this compound, right? And then like I looked it up, and it's actually a compound I was doing research on in 2008, and today is 2024, and it's just becoming a market. So like if you think about it takes 16 years for like something to go from like end stage research to practically in people's houses. So like I just felt like that timeline was too slow for my personality. And I did a little bit of work in public policy, and I kind of wanted to find a place where like my experience as a scientist can also still help people. And that's how I got into science education. And I've had various roles in that so far. But the Ozempic thing was a pretty funny thing to find out recently. I was like, that is the compound I did my PhD research on so many years ago.
Hilarious. So yeah. How many years was that again? You said it was.
So that's 16 years. I did that experiment in 2008. So it's 2024 today. And just, and I probably was at the end stage. So it probably started in 2000. So 24 years of like research back and forth. And now consumers are getting it. So it's slow.
Well, hey, at least that means it's well tested, right? I know there's about it not being well tested. Awesome. So it's okay. You've had a robust career. It looks like you were at Girl Scouts, USC, Technovation, and now EnCorps. What did you do at Girl Scouts?
Yes, I was their STEM program manager. So I developed new kind of, everyone's probably familiar with the different badges that the girls earn. So I used to develop new ones. I will partner with organizations like JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab, and create new programs for girls to do for me, like I always try to think about the engineering design process and I have kids experiences. I did a lot of that kind of work.
Mm, cool. Yeah, you've got some awesome names on your resume. And I kind of want to dive a little deeper into the topic of sort of getting meaning from your work.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people I have in the past struggled with, do I just work to live? Do I live to work? How much do I really need to care about my job versus like my income? What's the trade-off there? Can you have it all? Can you have both? So from your perspective, like how do you derive meaning from your work?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think it also evolves as you evolve in your personal and your career, right? Like I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I think my life was very different. My priorities were very different before I had her, for example. But for me, I think I think for me, the most important thing is I need to feel that my work that I do day to day results in giving a positive impact to somebody. And that doesn't mean that every day is rosy. It doesn't mean that every day is easy and feel good. But I think the end of the day, what gives me reward is knowing that whatever work I put into, some kid in the school is going to benefit from that. Like, so I really aspire to make that be the end goal. But I do think one thing people don't always talk about in the nonprofit sector is there's very severe burnout, like, especially in certain nonprofits like animal shelters, domestic violence prevention, sort of certain kinds of causes oftentimes really drain you, right? Because you kind of end up absorbing a lot of the trauma. So like, I think one thing that's very important for people when they think about it is how your mission aligned with the mission of the organization. For me, I really care a lot about improving our science education in America and really offering it to more diverse students. That's something that even if I wasn't working in the sector, I will probably be volunteering to do that. So like really think about what is how well you're aligned with the mission. I think the other thing to think about is like how well balanced is your life, because work always can get to you, right? Like, I've been like rejected for $1 million grants, and it really kind of could put you in a slump. But like, do you have other support structures and things that will bring you joy to combat that, if that makes sense? Because rejection is very and I've never worked in the for-profit sector, so I don't really know what that is like. But I would say 95% of the things I ask for and I pursue, I get rejected. So that's a really high percentage of rejection. So like really thinking about like, do you have the capacity to like segment this part of your day into a part so you're not bringing all of that into your family and your personal life? And that took me a long time to develop. Like in my first few nonprofit jobs, like I would like sometimes couldn't sleep, just like the fact that I got rejected from a grant, but I really had to kind of develop that, like that's part of my job, but, and I think the other thing I try to think about is even if I ran out of money, like in 6 months and I had to close shop of this nonprofit, like, did we make an impact and did we do everything we can? And I think that's where, for a nonprofit, at least for me, I feel like, okay, even if I had to shut down at the end of this fiscal year, I know that I generated 1,200 fellows. I know I generated 300 teachers. So I know I made an impact. So I feel like even if I had to close a business, I did what I was called to do. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. I think it's really about like, did I stand up for what I believed in? Did I derive meaning from what I do? And the way to do that is to give it your all.
Yeah. And I think you're all, I thought about when I was at Technovation, it's a global education nonprofit. And, I used to travel like I went to Doha and I went to UAE to like bring engineering to girls there. We were doing a program where men and women couldn't be in the same room. So I had to like draw a curtain on the wall, and then like the dads were on one side, I've lived all these like big experiences, but it also was somewhere where I couldn't protect my mental health. It was like every single day, like, a good example of that was like when America decided to pull out of Afghanistan, we had some volunteers on the ground and like we were trying to help them get out because of the US military was coming up, but like it was completely out of my control. And I remember just like sobbing like for days and days. I'm like, what's going to happen to these volunteers? But I realized that nonprofit was maybe not the best fit for me because I don't do well when things are completely out of my control. And those are examples. So I had to learn that maybe international education is maybe not my best suit. So like you get chances to develop. And I do think even I think in different careers, you learn more how to protect for your and I think optimize for your strength versus like pushing yourself up to your where you lack up. But anyhow.
Yeah, I think that is something you learn over time. That's an extreme example of learning that lesson.
Yeah, but it was completely nothing I could do, but it still impacted your work. So
yeah, 100%. Which nonprofit was that?
at Technovation, yeah, it's a pretty
Technovation.
we were at 80 different countries where people teach girls how to build an app that solves a problem in the community. It's a really, really cool organization, and they have a really big vision to reach 25 million kids in the next 10 years. It was big. It's a great vision, but it was the day-to-day operation was just a little bit too much for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, having volunteers stuck there is insane. I couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the fact that you derive meaning from your work by, playing to your strengths, and also just making sure that you're making a difference. I feel like that's what you do. It's what you help other people do at your current company.
Yeah.
So can you talk more about like how you help coach folks to go after meaningful work?
Yeah. So, who we call our fellows, they're STEM professionals and they are interested in becoming teachers. And oftentimes they have the same fears like most people have when they're entering a nonprofit or education sector, especially coming from a high paying kind of tech jobs. It's like a big transition. So one thing that we really work towards is like really making sure people are going into it for the right reasons, like that why do you care about education? One of the questions that we ask all our fellows up front, and I think people are kind of like shocked that we ask this up front, but like we want our educators to all believe that all students have the capacity to learn, regardless of their background, regardless of their perspective. So we actually have those difficult conversations, like what are your implicit bias towards certain genders, certain ethnic groups, and like certain socioeconomic stuff. Do you feel like these kids can learn? So we have a pretty intensive discussion around it because we really want, one thing we've learned is that if they don't really believe in that growth mindset in education, they don't become great teachers. And when there are challenges, it gets very discouraging. So we do want to have that kind of upfront. So we help them really think about like internally what motivates you, what's in your heart, why do you want to do this? The other conversation we often have is like, at what point in your career are you doing this? So we sometimes have people who've worked in like, I don't know, like Lockheed Martin for 25 years and they're like in their retirement, but they want to do something that is more, that they feel more reward versus just earning money. There are people who do that in retirement. We've also seen a lot of people kind of in their mid-careers as their financially gets a little bit more established, their children are in school, they're more stable, and then that's when they do it too. And one thing that's pretty new that we're seeing is a lot of younger folks, they graduate college, they go into like the high tech boom, and they're like, and then as the kind of tech boom's been kind of, winding down a little bit, or, it goes on ups and downs. I think they're a little bit in the down phase. They really are evaluating like, is this what I want to do? Do I want to code for this AI algorithm for the rest of my life? And one thing that we do is give them a safe place. So they do this as a volunteer for 10 weeks. So they don't have to quit their jobs. Like, they can do this in a safe place. We match them with the school and a mentor teacher, and then they get to experience what it's like to be a teacher. And one thing we found is that usually by week 3, a lot of people who had that kind of spark in their heart, they want to do it, and they kind of see this other joy. I like to tell people to think about your financials as well. Like, because even when you're enrolling in a credentialing program to become a teacher, that is additional expense. So if you're like living month to month, maybe, and that might not be the best time to take on an additional cost of getting credentialing. We do help folks like get scholarships and like residency programs and things like that, but that's not for everybody. So we do try to be realistic in that regard. And we also help them get a sense of what is a typical range of salary for a teacher. And it's interesting because oftentimes teacher salaries out of 9 months. So it's like we're used to annual salary. So like they have to kind of redo that math and see other benefits such as like, like free healthcare. A lot of teachers get 100% healthcare data. So there's additional costs. So we help them kind of see what is a monetary value in that. But it does, it's really about timing in your career. Do you have the financial kind of security to be able to do this? And why are you doing it? Because if you're just doing it to get another job, like being a teacher is a very hard job, so we do try to get it to be aligned that way.
And what advice do you have for people in general who are trying to derive meaning from a career?
Yeah, I think first thing is really kind of try to look into yourself and think about what problem is really interesting to you, what brings you joy. I always recommend trying to find a nonprofit or a group that is doing work in that field and volunteer. Like, I think that's really step one. Yesterday was at a Women in Startup, like social impact summit at Google here in LA. And it was like really interesting. There's all these people trying to start startups with like interesting problems, but as a one person who's like one step removed, I'm often like, do we really need another company that does that? And I think that's the same with nonprofits. I'm always like, do we need another nonprofit that does X, Y, and Z? So like really thinking about like what is like a unique problem or a unique approach to a problem and how big that problem is. So like I always recommend to volunteer and talk to lots of people. And also like that could include like strangers on the internet, like, like if anybody usually pings me on the internet and on LinkedIn and says, can I do an information interview? Like most people love talking about themselves. So like people will answer those calls and really get to see that. And I think there could be effective ways of building your own career. I think one of the questions that may come up later is like, what can you do in your current job to develop skills? And I think looking for like, is there like a volunteer event at your company that you can take lead on? Is there like ERG groups you can engage with, CSR efforts? I think those are all things that build stewardship, but like really think about what do you care about? And are there other ways you can kind of practice trying to solve that even before you make a big transition?
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, the volunteer thing. I think a lot of people kind of skip that step.
Yeah.
Straight for maybe I'll just try it out or something.
Yeah.
That's really good advice. Okay, and we don't have a ton of time left, so I'm gonna jump to our listener questions.
Great.
This one is from Melody. She said, I'm looking to transition into nonprofit work. What skills or experiences from the corporate world do you think are most valuable in nonprofit leadership or teaching roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like project management, I think that's applicable anywhere. I think if you can show that you have good problem solving skills, especially in like a limited resource kind of environment, I think that's a great thing to show. And I think like started off in the beginning is more and more nonprofits are looking for quantifiable skills because we still need to prove our impact, and that oftentimes is in numbers. So thinking about if you have data analysis skills, if you have ways of like illustrating data, like those are all very helpful skills, and communication skills is like at the end any job. But I do think one thing to really in any sort of, I get a lot of applicants whenever we have open positions that come from for-profit sector. And the first thing I look for is mission alignment and then the problem solving skills. And are they able to communicate that those things align with the position? One thing I do want to just kind of give an advice on, and I think there's a little bit, and probably historically it's been true, is that nonprofits pay poorly is like a very common understanding. But I think that's changing. I think there's more and more nonprofits that use technology in terms of like their work. Like a good example is like Kiva, right? Like the microfinance. That's a tech company, really, even though they are a nonprofit. So I do think that And I think in the nonprofit sector, we're also realizing we can't pay people so poorly and expect them to do good work. And so like it's evolving. So I think don't be too afraid to look into other nonprofit sectors and kind of, but like just find the right fit. And, and I do think if you're bringing very unique skill sets to an organization, I think organizations will see a value in that.
Awesome. Thank you. And good question, Melody. This one's from Jeff. I love my job, but currently feeling burned out. Any advice for pushing through it and getting to the other side?
Yeah, I think we experienced that, all of us, in some way or another. I think thinking about like what brings you joy, I did this when I actually was at a job that was, I felt very burned out, but and I hadn't read a book in like 4 years. Like my daughter was born and I never found time to read a book. So one thing I choose to do is that, okay, 30 minutes every lunch, I'm going to get away from my computer and eat lunch while reading a book, right? It's 30 minutes. We all will survive, but it just brought me so much peace that I could do one small thing. So I would say, look at like Jeff, like think about what brings you joy and then try to find like even 1 hour a week that you can do that, if that's running or whatever that is. And if it is also that like you have a problem you want to solve, like maybe just spend 1 hour a week kind of focusing on that. And that could be at work or outside of work. And I think that's how you start kind of building that up, like the kind of where your heart can rewire itself beyond just the burnt out and finding joy and doing your work. But yeah, and I think talk to people. I think it's easy to feel comfort in complaining about hard things, like in your life. I do believe that that's good for you. That's why you have people out, therapists, people are friends. But I do think doing something active to make it beyond just that stage is very important. So like just spend a little bit of time, even if it's just reading, just listening to music, or just staying away from your computer for 15 minutes a day. I think that's all. These are all like little things you can do.
That's really good advice. And I like the phrase rewire your heart. That's well said. I want to go back to something we talked about in the very beginning of the pod, which is your dad moved you to America because he thought the education system was better. What do you think after having gone through both education systems?
I think about this quite often because my husband is a professor and he has many international students, right? Like from all sorts of different countries, and they're PhD students. So these are smart students. And we talk about that with this is that I think American education system, with all its flaws and with all its limitation, I think it still gives a lot of freedom for students to be creative. And like I think it encourages us to, and it's interesting to think about even today, most technological innovation occurs in America. A lot of these big internet, like these big things happen in America. So like I do think there's a good value. I do think like Korean education was more rigorous. So I do think that sometimes those things really help you when you're going into science field because you solve like every equation in the book, but I do think American education gives kids freedom to really, to be creative and be exposed to more things. Like my daughter's in first grade and she's doing like drama class. I would have never done that in first grade. But I do think there's a benefit. And I think that's also why I feel very passionate about bettering the science education side of American education system because we have so much potential. And I think if we can also give more opportunity to under-resourced community school students, then I think we can be even a stronger economy. But yeah, I think for me, American education system has more pros than cons.
I agree with you there. My mom was a retired high school teacher, English teacher, and she has so many wonderful stories of the creativity she was able to inspire students. So I totally agree, but despite its flaws, obviously.
Yeah.
Which are given. We know what they are.
Yes.
Okay, we are all out of time. I could talk to you forever, but my final question is, what is the best way for folks to get in touch with you if they want to ask you any follow-up questions?
Yeah, I think you can reach me on LinkedIn. You can look for Amy Hee Kim, or you can even send me an email at amyheekim@gmail.com. And I'm very fast at responding. So looking forward to hearing from folks.
Awesome. I can attest to that. She is very fast at responding, and I'll link your contact info in the show notes as well so people can get in touch with you. Awesome. Again, Amy, thank you for the awesome work you're doing in underprivileged communities. I really appreciate it. Having come from one myself, it means a lot. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, bye. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Career Diaries podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review to help get word out about the show. Email bree@careerdiariespodcast.com with your burning career questions to get them answered on the podcast. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss another conversation.